Hi guys, today we are going to be learning more about finding the volume of rectangular prisms, and we are going to look at the volume formula and why it works. And this is part of our lesson for 10.2, and we're still working on our standards MD 3 and 4 that says I can accurately state and understand the volume formula and why it works. So let's review some important terms. This is a rectangular prism. And remember, it's a solid three-dimensional object which has 6 faces that are all rectangles. All right, and volume is the amount of space that a three-dimensional figure contains. Remember, volume is always measured in cubic units. That's something that's very important. You always need to remember. So what do we know about finding the volume so far? Well, up to this point, what have we done to find the volume of a rectangular prism? We have simply counted cubes, or we've counted the rows and the layers and multiplied those together. So look at this example here in green, and we know that in the bottom row of this rectangular prism has 2 rows. This is a row here, right here, and this is a row right here. Sorry, I didn't mean for that to show up. Row here, row here. And we know that there are 1, 2, 3 cubes in each of our 2 rows. And then we know that we have 1, 2 layers. Okay, so if we wanted to look at those and multiply those out, we would multiply 2 times 3, and we would get 6. And then with 2 layers, we would have 12 cubic units would be our volume for this figure. Now, if we look over here at this one, same thing. We could just count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Not a whole lot to do for that one. And that would be 6 cubic units. Okay, so moving on, let's look at this example. If we count the number of cubes in a row, we have 1, 2, 3, 4. And our number of rows are 1, 2, 3, 4. And then we have 1 layer. So if we multiplied those together, 4 times 4 times 1, we would get 16 units cubed, or 16 cubed units for our volume. So let's look at this figure. There are 1, 2, 3, 4 cubes in each row of 1, 2, 3. And there are 1, 2 layers. So if we multiplied those together, 4 times 3 times 2, we would find that the volume of this rectangular prism is 24 units cubed, or 24 cube units. Now, let's look at this one. All right, in this figure, we can count that there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 cubes in 1, 2, 3 rows, and there are 1, 2 layers. Okay, so if we multiply those out, we would find that our volume is 30 cube units. So let's see now if we can come up with a formula for finding the volume of a rectangular prism. So remember that rectangular prisms are three-dimensional figures, and that means that they have 3 dimensions or measurements. And we have been looking at figures in terms of cubes, rows, and layers. Okay, however, those are not actual measurements of a 3-dimensional figure. So let's look and figure out which measurements we could use to help us create a formula for finding the volume. If we couldn't use the words 4 cubes across, or 3 rows of cubes and 2 layers of cubes, then what might we use instead? If we think in terms of measurement, think about that for a minute and see what you come up with. Okay, I think you may have come to the conclusion that we could call the number of cubes in each row, that could represent our length, and then the number of rows would represent our width, and then the number of layers would represent our height. So every rectangular prism will have a length, a width, and a height. So now instead of multiplying the number of cubes in each row by the number of rows we have, and then multiplying that by the numbers of layers we have, we can use a formula. We can multiply length times width times height. But wait, there's still another way that we can calculate the volume. If you remember, the area of a rectangle is length times width. When you find how many cubes are in a row and how many rows there are, you're actually finding the area of the base of your figure. So in a right rectangular prism, the base is always a rectangle. When we multiply the base by how many layers we have, we are actually multiplying the base times the height. So another formula for finding the volume of a rectangular prism is volume equals base times height. Remember, we don't say area because area is the unit of measure. That's what we use when we're finding the measurement for a two-dimensional figure. And our rectangular prisms are three-dimensional, so that's why we call that the base. But the formula or the way to find the base is the same as finding the area, which is length times width. So we know that we have a formula for finding the volume, which equals length times width times height. And now we know why the formula works. So let's move on. So if we wanted to find the length of this rectangular prism, we could just count the units 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And the width would be 1, 2, 3, 4. And the height would be 1, 2, 3. So to find the volume of this rectangular prism, we would want to multiply those together. Oh, I'm sorry, I thought that was on there. And we would multiply 7 times 5. I'm sorry, 7 times 4, which is 28. And then we would multiply 28 times 3 to get our volume. Okay, next we will look at the length of this rectangular prism, then the width, the number of layers or the height, and then we would put those together to find the volume. So now I would like for you on your scratch piece of paper, I would like for you to construct a rectangular prism that is 4 cubic units long, 2 cubic units wide, and 3 cubic units tall. And then I want you to make sure that your volume for that is 24 cubic units. Okay, and you are done with this video. If you feel confident and you're ready to move on, go ahead and take the 10 to quick check. If not, you think you need a little bit more practice, then you may move on to the practice activities. Thank you and have a great rest of the day.